My family moved into this upscale suburban home after saving up for a couple of years. It was a model home before we got it, the kind that builders use to show off the neighborhood, complete with staged furniture. It felt like a dream come true after the years we spent scrimping and saving. The house had a loft area with 2 staircases leading up to it, one from the front and one from the back. It was open and airy, so sound traveled easily. You could hear just about everything from that space. One afternoon, I was hanging out in the loft with my 2 best friends from high school, Mike and Sarah. They were dating, and they had a habit of being all over each other whether I was around or not. That day was no different. We were watching TV, and they were snuggled up on the couch while I sat on the armchair nearby. At some point, I got up to use the bathroom. When I left, they were practically glued to each other. But when I came back, they were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, looking uncomfortable. I stopped in my tracks. "What happened?" I asked, half joking. "You guys finally have a fight?" Mike looked at me with this weird expression and said, "Your little sister's home." This confused me. My little sister was at a friend's house. I knew she wasn't home. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Sarah chimed in, looking just as uneasy. "We heard her," she said. "She laughed and ran up the stairs. You didn't hear it?" I just stared at them. "No one's home," I said. "It's just us." They both insisted they heard a laugh, followed by the sound of someone running up the back staircase. Sarah said it was the kind of laugh kids make when they're playing, light and quick. Mike added that they heard hands hitting the steps, like someone scrambling up on all 4s. "Let's check the house," I said, nervous as to why they would be hearing these noises. We walked through every room, calling out, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone else in the house. I even called my sister's phone to make sure she was still at her friend's. She picked up right away, completely fine and nowhere near the home. And that should have been the end of it, just my friend's imagination running wild. But after that day, I started noticing strange things. The loft, in particular, gave me a weird feeling at night, like someone was watching me. I told myself it was just in my head. Then there was the intercom. The house had one of those old-school intercom systems that connected to all the rooms. You could use it to play music, or call someone from another part of the house. The main unit was downstairs, right below the loft. Every so often, usually late at night, I'd wake up to the sound of static coming through the intercom. It wasn't music or a voice, just the faint hiss of an open line, like someone was holding down the button, but not speaking. It always happened around the same time, between 2 and 3 a.m. I'd have to get out of bed, go all the way downstairs, and manually turn it off at the main unit. I'd stand there in the dark, my heart pounding, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but there was never anyone there. I didn't tell my friends about the intercom. I didn't even tell my parents. I did not want to freak anyone out, and I figured it was just some kind of weird wiring issue. But every time I had to walk past the loft on those late-night trips downstairs, I could have sworn that I wasn't alone. Months later, I learned something about the house that made everything click. Before it was a model home, a family had lived there. One of their kids, a little girl, had been playing in the loft when she climbed onto the railing. She fell and hit the floor below. She did not survive. I did not want to believe it at first, but Mike and Sarah still swear to this day that they heard a little girl laughing and running up the stairs that afternoon. And that intercom? I don't know. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But every time I walk into that loft after dark, I couldn't help but feel someone was still there, waiting for me to notice them. I live in Eastern Oregon, but my mom lives over on the western side of the state. One summer, I decided to visit her for a couple of weeks. My mom has always been really into the outdoors. so she suggested we take a short trip to the coast. We picked a free campsite on the top of a hill in the coastal mountains. It's about a 25-minute drive from the main road to the top of the hill where the campsite is. Remote, quiet, and surrounded by thick forest. Exactly the kind of place my mom loves. When we arrived, it was completely empty, which we did not think much of it. It was a weekday, and the campsite wasn't particularly well known. We spent the rest of the day setting up, making food, and just enjoying the fresh air. It was peaceful and uneventful. Around dinner time, though, a beat-up old truck came rumbling up the hill. Inside were 4 or 5 men, and they parked near our site. They weren't campers. They did not have gear or supplies. They just stood around talking and looking over in our direction. Eventually, one of the men walked over to my mom and struck up a conversation. I couldn't hear what they were talking about, but my mom was polite and did not seem alarmed. After a few minutes, they got back into their truck and drove off. When I asked my mom what they wanted, she shrugged it off, saying they were asking about fishing spots in the area. It seemed harmless enough at the time, so I did not think much of it. That night, we climbed into the tent and went to sleep. It was dead quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, just silence. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something felt off. I realized my mom was sitting up in the tent, completely still. I started to ask her what was wrong, but before I could get a word out, she put her hand over my mouth. Her eyes were wide, and she brought a finger to her lips to signal me to stay quiet. At first I didn't hear anything, but then I caught it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. They weren't coming from far off in the woods. They were right outside our tent. I held my breath, straining to listen. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be sneaky anymore. The steps were slow and heavy, circling our tent. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was out there might hear it. Then, I noticed the flap covering the tent zipper move, just slightly. Someone was right there. I looked at my mom, panicked. She stayed calm, or at least she pretended to be. In a loud, steady voice, she said, "Jeff, grab the gun." Jeff is my dad's name, and he was not there. It was just me and my mom. But whoever was outside did not know that. As soon as she said it, the footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, everything was completely still. Then, without a word, we heard the footsteps retreat. They moved quickly, fading into the distance. My mom waited a long time before whispering to me that it was okay to lie down again. Neither of us slept much after that. At first light, we packed up our campsite as quickly as we could. My mom kept scanning the woods, and I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. We did not see anyone or hear any more signs of whoever it was. When we finally reached the main road, my mom pulled over and started to cry. That's when I realized how scared she'd been. We never reported the incident. We didn't have any proof, and technically, nothing happened. But to this day, I can't stop thinking about the fact that someone came all the way up that hill in the middle of the night. They did not have a vehicle, as we would have heard it. They walked up there, in the dark. For what? To see if 2 women camping alone were vulnerable. If my mom hadn't thought quickly and pretended we weren't alone. I don't even want to think about how that night might have ended. Now, whenever I go camping, I'm a lot more careful about where I stay and who knows I'm there. I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps right outside the tent. And I'll definitely never forget the courage and quick thinking my mom had to save us both. I had the kind of parents who did not sweat the small stuff, which meant they'd let me sleep in the living room on weekends when I was little. I'd stay up watching Nick at night, my sister in the other room since she was a light sleeper. Of course, I never made it past midnight before crashing out on the couch. The living room had this big window that faced our front yard, with a tree line just beyond. We lived in a heavily wooded area out in Georgia, so it was trees for days. One night I had fallen asleep on the couch like usual. I woke up though, with this weird, prickly feeling, like something wasn't right. It wasn't a noise or a dream. It was just this jolt of awareness that shot me up into the sitting position. I stared out the window without knowing why. The moon was bright, casting light over the yard, and that's when I saw it. There was someone in the tree. Not just a branch moving in the wind or some animal, but a full-on silhouette of a person perched up there, halfway up, crouched like they were trying to stay hidden. They were completely still. Our dog Rex must have sensed it too, because he charged over to the window, barking and snarling like I'd never heard before. He's a big German Shepherd mix, and his growl alone would have sent most people running. But this figure in the tree did not move. I bolted off the couch and ran to my parents' room. My dad's a heavy sleeper, but somehow I managed to wake him up without completely losing it. I was trying to explain what I'd seen, but the words were all jumbled. Something about someone in the tree, Max going nuts, and how they needed to go and check. My dad did not waste any time asking questions. He grabbed a shotgun from the closet and headed outside, Max right on his heels. I stayed with my mom, who was holding me close, trying to calm me down. I heard Dad outside, yelling into the night. Max's barking faded as they moved further away from the house. After what felt like forever, my dad came back in and told us he did not see anyone. He said maybe it was a shadow or my imagination, but he would still keep an eye out. He made some coffee and started doing laps around the house, checking the doors and windows. I did not want to sleep in the living room anymore, so I went to my bedroom and woke up my sister. She was groggy and annoyed until I told her what had happened. Then she was just as freaked out as I was. We huddled up together in bed, listening to Dad's footsteps as he patrolled the house. After a while, things felt a little calmer. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I started thinking maybe Dad was right. Maybe it was just a shadow. Maybe I was imagining the whole thing. But then I saw him again. It was through the window this time, my bedroom window. The curtains were thin, and the moonlight was still bright enough to see outside. He was standing there, close enough that I could see his face, or more accurately, the outline of it. He wasn't trying to get in. He wasn't doing anything, except watching. Then he raised a finger to his lips in a shushing motion. It was so deliberate, so slow, like he wanted to make sure I understood. I froze. My sister hadn't noticed yet. She was facing the other way, half asleep. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. And then, just as quickly as I saw him, he turned and ran. Not toward the house or back to the tree line, just straight out to the open field in our backyard. I watched him until he disappeared into the shadows. I finally managed to cry. Not quiet tears, but these uncontrollable sobs that woke up my sister and brought my mom running into the room. I told them what I'd seen, and this time, Dad did not doubt me. He grabbed a flashlight and went back outside, Max following close. He stayed out there for hours, searching every corner of the yard, but whoever it was had vanished. We never figured out who it was or what they wanted. Dad started locking up the house tighter after that, even during the day, and I never slept in the living room again. And to this day, the memory of that man's face and the way he shushed me still haunts me. It wasn't just the fear of being watched, it was the calculated way he did it, like he knew exactly how much it would terrify me. And he succeeded.